Good
Good
morning.
morning and welcome everyone to our April Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. We've got lots of fun things planned for today. My name's Charlotte Glenn. I'm the state coordinator for the Extension Master Gardener Program. So glad to welcome you here on this beautiful spring morning. And we're going to have fun. We're going to have Critters or Not today, which is the everybody's favorite quiz show, right? We learned that last year. We established that as a fact. So we'll be looking at some images. Matt and Mike will be showing us some images and quizzing our knowledge on what's going on there. Then they will share with us some pest and plant disease issues of azaleas. That's a plant we're featuring today. Of course, they're in bloom across the state right now. Beautiful, beautiful spring flowering shrubs. I'll be talking about some plant these instead. If you actually have some issues with azaleas, you can't grow them because of some disease problems, some things you can plant instead. Then we'll finish up with bolos, which are be on the lookout. And I will close things out with some Extension Master Gardener Program announcements, so be sure to hang around for that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt and Mike so they can get things started. I'm going to stop sharing so they can share.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Welcome.
I am going to begin. And unfortunately, we're going to begin with some sad news. Our friend and colleague, Dave Stephan, passed away at the beginning of April. We're all pretty broken up about that. Many of you, some of you may know him. He presented on this program for around 2012 and before I came on. So he was the former entomologist at the NCSU PDIC for over 40 years before retiring, and I took over for him. He continued to help me in the clinic and us in the clinic after retiring. He was a huge influence on me and helped me out with a lot of things, with a lot of IDs and whatnot, and just an all-around great guy. Well, he had a huge wealth of knowledge and identification and biology of insects and other arthropods. He was also an avid herpetologist and one of the founders of the NC Herpetological Society, and also a naturalist. He knew his plants really well too. And also he was honored with a couple of species names. So he has a millipede and a tree hopper named after him. And just to show you some of the things, this was Dave way back when in the 70s when he first started. Here is the tree hopper that's named after him, Telamona Stephanii, which was named by a friend of ours, Matt Wallace, who was a grad student with me a while ago. And then just here's a kind of a smattering of some insects that he brought me to photograph. He was always on the lookout for cool critters for me to take a look at and talk about. So we really miss him, and yeah, it was very sad news. And we've lost a big part of our department and the clinic. So, but moving on from that, today we're going to do our fun feature, Critter or Not. So Mike and I will be trading off on these, and this is our fun little quiz show kind of thing. So what you'll basically be offered a photo, and you'll have three choices. Is it A, critter, an insect, a mite, a spider, mollusk, or vertebrate animal? B, a pathogen, a disease-causing fungus, bacterium, virus, nematode, parasitic plant, etc., or not? A saprobic organism, normal plant part, environmental stress, cultural problem, genetic abnormality, etc. So keep track of your score as we go along. And for groups, please designate a secretary to take the votes and record the majority opinion. So without further ado, hopefully everyone is set and able to do the polls, and we're gonna start it with here. So I think, Mike, are you all ready?
I am. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Great. Okay, so I'm assuming, I think you can start a poll too during it, right? Do you want to start the polls for the ones you ask?
I certainly will.
Sure, okay, well, you'll start now.
Oops, that's not the poll we wanted. Hold on. Sorry about that, folks. All right, you can move that to the side so that you can see the picture if it's in your way, the little pull window there. But this is an image that came from a greenhouse. The plant is basil, and there are these structures around the edges there of, looks like the cotyledons that were causing concern. So they contacted us and we're contacting you. So is this a critter or not? And again, you have the three choices, whether it could be a critter of some kind. So that again was an arthropod or mollusk or a vertebrate animal, just anything you would consider a critter. Or is it a pathogen, disease-causing organism, or is it something else? So the responses are streaming in. It's good to see that. A lot of activity out there, a lot of interest. And we'll just give it another few seconds for folks to register whether this is a critter or not.
And it's up to you, Mike. Yep. Okay. All right.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Fairly even distribution here, although the folks who said critter were a minority, but fairly even between pathogen and not. And it turns out in this case, okay, hold on, that it is not. This is a slime mold, actually, and we've talked about these on the program before. They are organisms that live as an inconspicuous plasmodium in soil or organic litter, etc., just engulfing bacteria, bits of organic matter, not doing any harm to the plants around them. But then when it comes time to reproduce, they climb up on a surface, could be a brick wall, it could be a plant that happens to be there, and develop into the characteristic fruiting body. In this case, they're called sporangia, where they produce their spores and then continue the life cycle. So this one, we didn't ever get a physical sample of it. This could be a Physarum of some kind. It's not Physarum cinerea, the one, or cinerium, excuse me, the one that we most often see. It could be, I couldn't rule out it being something like a didimium, but it's a slime mold and harmless to the plant in this case.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. I'm going to introduce the next one. So, all right. So we have a red maple from Beaufort County, April, and you can see it looks a little odd. So what's going on here? Let me launch the poll. So relaunch. Let's see. Relaunch it. Okay. Can everyone see that? I hope. So critter, pathogen, not. I love seeing the bars go up and down in real time.
It is dramatic.
It is. It is. What's going to win out?
Unfortunately, and not everyone can see that. As hosts, we can see the poll results as they come in. You'll see it after we decide.
It's like a little animation there. Yeah, they're fighting for growth. Okay, well, we'll give it another 5 seconds. And then we will stop and launch. And okay, so we had 38% of people say it's a pathogen, 24% of people say it's a critter, and 15% say not. So what was it? I'm gonna close my poll. It is a pathogen, technically. This is American mistletoe. So this is a parasitic plant on various trees. Mike, if you want to explain a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot you could say on mistletoe. You can almost do a whole segment on it. The species around here is Phorhodendron leucarpum, which is not the same as the European species of so much folklore, but superficially resembles it. There are apparently some subspecies around different parts of the United States. But the important thing for this particular slide and example is that on red maple, for some reason, it can infect trunks, and in this picture, large branches. We had one It's been cut down now, but here, very close to our building, with a big trunk infection of mistletoe, and occasionally, or actually most of the time, you'll see the leaves of the mistletoe kind of popping out there from the infection. I don't know what it is that allows it to do this much damage to that particular host in some cases, but if you see the strange growth, then look for the leaves of the mistletoe, I mean.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know when I hadn't seen it until I came down here, and it's such a really interesting plant, obviously. Okay, let's move on to the next one, Mike.
Well, I will introduce this by saying it's.
Oh, those are eggs.
So let's see. If you think they're eggs, then you're going to want to answer the critter as your selection on the poll. Which thank you for reminding me. I have to relaunch the poll there, so folks can decide if this is a critter, a pathogen, or not. Interesting that they are on the underside of these leaves. The photo. This is actually April of last year now. That came in from Chatham.
Yeah, I don't know if I should give a hint, or not a hint, but another thing, another added bit of information. We saw also this. I was sent some photos on tobacco as well, so that was a very similar situation.
And while people are thinking about this, let me address the question that popped up in the chat there from Nancy and Thomas, and whether or not mistletoe is a pathogen. And since the definition of a pathogen is an organism that after interaction with a plant causes symptoms, the answer would be yes. If it were not causing any kind of symptoms, you could argue that it was a parasite but not a pathogen. But in this case, clearly the plant growth is effective. So yes, by definition, it would be considered a pathogen. And there's really nothing that you could do about that. Anything that you would put on there to kill the mistletoe would kill the tree as well. At least, yeah, as far as I know. So small, of course, branch infections on low-growing branches you can prune out. But if you've got a trunk or a major limb like that that's infected, there's really not much you can do except to just live with it, and then eventually at some point it becomes intolerable, and then remove the limb or the tree.
Hi, Mike.
Wait, am I talking about this one?
No, you're talking about, yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's end the polling here. Interesting. Wow. A very strong.
Did you share this results? Is that shared or no?
I'm sorry, I ended the polling, but I didn't share it. Sorry for being selfish there. Okay, now everyone can see. Yes, a lot of people think this was a critter, and well, Matt, would you do the reveal, please? I don't know that I can.
Sure, there you go.
Yeah, another knot. So not eggs, not pupae of some kind. This, in fact, represents a fungus that was on the ground in the mulch, just kind of decaying the organic matter there, one of the bird's nest fungi, and they have their pyrioides, the little spore balls there that will splash out. And there's a filament on them that is sticky, so it will cause them to adhere to surfaces that they impact when the rain splashes them out. So this one is not, and again, nothing that's going to cause any kind of damage to the plant or to the gardener.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The picture of the fungi here are from that tobacco sample from a colleague of mine up in Maryland. He was growing some tobacco in his yard just for fun and research and whatnot. And he had the same issue. And we've also seen them on inanimate objects, so on garden borders and places like that. So they're indiscriminately sticking on things. But it was an interesting sample. Okay,
And,
next one. Oh, go ahead.
I would say it's interesting that was found in April, because I would not have expected them to be out quite so early. But yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, next one. This is playground equipment from Durham County, and so let's see, what is this? Let's relaunch this. All right. Critter, pathogen, not. Now, it is playground equipment.
Yeah, so would children be under critter? Like if you suspected it was kids that did that, would be the correct answer?
Yeah, I guess kids are critters, definitely. I have a couple, so here at home. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. And we will give it another 15, 20 seconds. That is a tight one, very tight one.
Yeah.
All right, we will end it there. And let me share the results. Okay, everybody see that? So critter won out with 37 or 40% of the respondents. 37% said not, and the pathogen were the others. So technically, well, I guess technically this is kind of not, but it is technically a critter. So this is snail or slug feeding trails on algae. So this is a very common pattern from the radulae, the teeth on the tongue of these mollusks. So they'll feed on algae off of surfaces that's what they scrape and they feed on. It could be leaf surfaces. It could be, this is playground equipment, of course. And sometimes you can even see them feeding on lichens and fungi that are on trees, and they leave a similar pattern when they chew into that. So they are munching along and create these really interesting, intricate patterns. So something to look out for. All right. And we'll go to the last one. All right.
So September of last year, a image sample here. I think this was just an image sample that came from Mecklenburg County, a weeping cherry, and these structures on the petioles and the leaf margins here. So the question for you folks, we launched the polling. Are we looking at a critter, a pathogen, or not? And I'm going to take a moment to take a sip of water here while you folks contemplate that. Excuse me.
So to do the live commentary, we've got a critter is made a big jump very quickly into the lead, but we'll see. We will see.
Looks like it's kind of stagnating here. So I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and this time I will share the results.
All right. So yeah, go ahead, Mike.
No,
I'll change it.
Yeah, it's obvious there that a strong preference for critter here, and unfortunately, it is not. Well, I guess fortunately for the homeowner here, because what this is a normal plant part. These are glands. They're usually not quite this obvious, but it's typical of prunus species to have there near the leaf blade petiole junction some of these glands, and again emphasizing the importance of recognizing the diversity of plant structures that may be out there, and in this case, nothing to worry about.
Yeah, definitely. If you have cherries, even the cherry laurels, the Prunus lauroceraceae, if you have those, they have these little glands on them as well. And a number of other plants, right, Mike, have some glands at the base of the leaves like that.
Well, the one that comes to mind for me is most people wouldn't have this, but some might. Ipomea. So your sweet potato, ornamental sweet potato, or I would imagine the regular root crop sweet potato has a gland in a similar location, which I've seen. I've seen a case where there was a sooty mold that grew probably from exudates around that gland on the morning glory and the sweet potato in the greenhouse. And I've also seen a case where it appears that a bacterial infection in the greenhouse may have gotten in through that. But yeah.
I feel like we saw privet with that before too, maybe, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go back into the samples. But yeah, it's an interesting thing when you see. Okay, Well, I'm going to continue with a little bit more quiz. Well, actually, first, let's see how many did you get correct? Let's just do a poll and see how everybody did. And by the way, these are some wasps, some ichneumoniid wasps that were drilling into some rotten wood for their wood wasp hosts that I saw over the weekend. It was a very interesting scene. You can obviously see 3 of them here. But just until the results come in, oh, nobody got all 5. That's great because, you know, if it was too easy, it wouldn't be fun, I guess.
Well, that was your complaint last time, Matt, that we needed to kind of make it harder. So,
well, that's good. Actually, we had nice. It looks like we have a nice distribution. We'll actually. I'm going to end that right here, right now, and we'll share the results. So it looks like the majority of people got 2 of the 5. You know, but some people on either side of that. So, you know, don't feel bad if you didn't get them all right. These were all intentionally tricky. That's why we put them in critter or not, because you know, these are always kind of strange. But we hope that you learn a little bit about these and recognize them next time, or if you see them out there. Okay. And since everybody's probably not tired of quizzes yet, I've got another quiz for you all. So what is this?
Oh,
What's
Matt,
this?
real quick,
Yes.
there was a question in the chat back to the snails and slugs. It said,
Yes.
did you say their teeth are on their tongue?
Yeah, they have this weird thing where they basically push their tongue in. It's probably not technically called a tongue, and I'm not a malacologist. So, but it basically they have these scraping teeth. It's like kind of like a cat's tongue, where they push it forward and then they rasp up the algae, and then it comes into the mouth, and that's how they feed. And so that's actually, they can feed on plants as well sometimes, where they rasp away that plant tissue in a similar manner. So yeah, they're weird. They're interesting. They're not insects, obviously. Okay, so what's this? I will start a poll. Let's relaunch this poll. So what's this? A Dalmatian's rump, a leopard moth's thorax, a hairy seed coat, the face of a fly, or a polka dot scale insect? So we got some, got a race. A lot of people answering the letter B. So we got about 51%. I'm going to end that in the interest of time. I'm going to end the poll here and share the results. So we have over 50% of people thought it was B, a leopard moth's thorax. The next most with a tie with 21% were hairy seed coat and polka dot scale insect, with a few people, 4 people answering the face of a fly. Well, I will say that the 4 people saying the face of the fly were correct. This is a rabbit botfly in the family Estridae, the species Cuterebra buccata. I am so thankful for Cheryl Messenger in Chowan County, who was a master gardener, for sending me this specimen. She saw it and it was still alive and she caught it. I've never seen one of the adults alive. They are fairly rarely found as adults. Larvae can be found in rabbits and sometimes in cats and other animals, but these botflies, although adorable, I think as adults, are pretty grotesque as larvae, where these flies lay eggs around where rabbits are. The maggots hatch and bore into the skin of rabbits where they live. But they are very cute cute flies. They're actually fairly large, almost 1 inch long. But this face was the close up, and they have these very reduced mouth parts because they don't feed as adults. They do all their feeding as larvae inside the rabbits. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight that because it's such a cool critter, and be on the lookout for these and their relatives. So, okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now so Mike can start sharing his screen. And thanks for everyone for playing along. I hope it was enjoyable, and now we'll get into our other part.
all right, give me 1 second here to get things rolling. All right. All right, hopefully folks are seeing a big, beautiful azalea that Matt took a picture of.
I
And
see it.
we're going to just talk a little bit about some of the problems that azaleas have. And this is not to knock azaleas. They do have a few issues, some of which are catastrophic, but many of which are more aesthetic. Excuse me. And we're going to start out here with one of the most serious ones, which is Phytophthora root rot, which we talked about a lot on this program in the past and other contexts, since there are different species of Phytophthora and they can affect different hosts. One of the most common ones that we see on our woody ornamentals in both nursery and landscape situations is Phytophthora cinnamomi. And that's the one that some research has been done with it on azalea in particular. The Phytophthora species are water molds. So if you want to colloquially, is that a word? Call them fungi, then I wouldn't argue too much from an ecological standpoint, but some folks may argue from a phylogenetic standpoint that they're not related to the true fungi at all, since they're what are classified as oomycetes. So they live in the soil. A few of them do have some foliar and stem infecting properties that occasionally show up, but we're going to focus on the main one that we see here in azalea, which is the root rot. And the root infection, of course, causing a compromised root system, so less water uptake, less nutrient uptake, and you see the result. You get a general decline, poor growth, smaller than normal leaves. Leaves may be discolored. You see some defoliation here. You can see some lichens growing on the stems, which is an indication that it's been growing poorly. So just generally a shabby appearance to this azalea because of the infection of the roots by Phytophthora. Well, there are some differences in susceptibility among azaleas. I'm still, for the purposes of this presentation, going to go with the standpoint that you should replace this with something other than azalea at this location. So you won't be able to eliminate the Phytophthora from the soil. You want to choose something else, and I'm going to leave that part to Charlotte. But I will mention that the Azalea chapter of the second IPM shrub book does go into a little bit of detail about resistance and mentions, for example, 4 encore azalea cultivars that experimentally anyway show a high degree of resistance to Phytophthora root rot. But again, I'm not quite comfortable with making that as a recommendation at this point. Let me, though, pull up the, put in the chat the link to our publication AG 747, which is where we have the, where we have not just a list of alternate plants to use in situations where you've had Phytophthora root rot, but also it allows you to look at some of the cultural controls that we recommend in these situations. So that's not it there. So things like keeping the beds raised to improve drainage, adding organic matter to the soil, those will help a lot in terms of reducing problem with not just Phytophthora, but with the oomycetes, the water molds in general. And I am having my meeting controls. Let's see if I can hide this here. There we go. I will paste this quickly into the chat so that you'll have that link to that publication. But again, Charlotte is going to be talking in more detail about the alternatives to azalea if you do happen to have Phytophthora. Next, let me show you, this is not an azalea root, it's actually Cryptomeria, but we've talked about two, I think, in fact, maybe been last month or 2 months ago, I showed a slide like this, where the test for root rot, since it can be tricky, not all roots of trees and shrubs are are easy just visually to see if you've got decay. But if you can pull on it and you see that the outer portion of the root slides along that inner vascular bundle like a bead on a wire, then you know you've got root rot. It's a little bit hard to do with azalea because the fine roots of azalea are quite fine, but pulling on that root will help you determine if you have root rot. Doesn't tell you if you've got Phytophthora or not, but that would be one of the common ones. We do see armillaria root rot. Again, this picture is not azalea, obviously. Not as common. Only about a third as common, according to our records, in homegrown azaleas as Phytophthora root rot. But that's one that potentially you could diagnose yourself if you know the shrub is coming out. You peel off the bark at the base of the main stem and look for that mat of cream-colored fungal mycelium there between the wood and the bark. Another soil problem that we do see on azalea is damage by stunt nematodes. There are a few nematodes that we'll sometimes pick up, but the main one that we are concerned about on azaleas is the stunt nematode or Tylenchorhynchus species. There are a couple of, maybe 3 at least, reported on rhododendron species, but you may see most often Tylenchorhynchus claytonii mentioned. I'm just going to leave it as SPP for purposes here. So in this particular photo, there's also a little bit of a Phomopsis dieback, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you've got nematodes in the soil that are stressing the plants. Again, reduced root function. This is one of the reasons why we see more nematode problems on the lighter soils, the sandier soils, because you have the drought stress added to compromised root systems, and you get the general stress. And anytime you get stress like that, you're going to have other problems like canker fungi potentially coming in, and I'll be mentioning one of those in a minute. Excuse me. Here are a couple of photographs of the actual critters. These are microscopic, but you can see here on the upper one is a male, the lower is a female. You don't usually hear me talking about those terms because I'm used to talking about things like fungi and bacteria and viruses, but nematodes do have males and females. This is an ectoparasite. So unlike our root knot nematode that burrows into the root and develops a feeding site and causes a gall, this is feeding on the plant cells from outside the root, and they will not cause gall, so you won't be looking for that as a symptom. And I wanted to mention a lot of what we refer to still, you'll find it out on the web, goes back to a publication by Mike Benson and Ken Barker of NC State that came out in 1985, where they looked at the susceptibility of different shrub species to different nematode species here, because you've got to know the combination of which plant and which nematode to really know how much damage is going to occur. So while the stunt nematode, for example, is a concern on azaleas, it can also damage, they found, acuba and some hollies and rose. So you want to know before you make your replanting decision. But I wanted to take the opportunity here to talk about terminology and to think about how the host plant and the nematode respond to one another. There are actually 4 categories. Now, not everyone uses these terms the same way, so you have to be careful and ask or read carefully when you see these kind of terms to make sure that how they're defining them. But in this particular case, it depends on whether the nematode population increases or declines when presented with that host, and how the host responds, if its growth is normal or if its growth is inhibited, if it's stunted. So if you see that the host is being stunted, but the nematode population and the nematode population is increasing, then we would call that susceptible, and that's fairly obvious. But tolerant actually means that the nematodes are doing all right. They're actually increasing in their population, but the host doesn't show any symptoms. So that's great if that's the host you want. It's not so great if you may be later changing to something else that's not as tolerant of the nematodes in the soil because they're still increasing. Resistance would be when the host grows well and the nematodes are declining. They can't reproduce well on it. So that's the ideal, but not always possible. And then a situation we don't talk about very often, the intolerant situation where both the nematode does poorly, doesn't reproduce, but its effect on the host is so dramatic that it is stunted even though the nematodes are doing poorly. So just kind of keep these terms in mind as to what they mean, and always ask if you're not sure what the particular author or speaker is talking about. Our main canker disease or dieback disease that we see on azalea is caused by the fungus Phomopsis. I won't even take a stab at what particular species might be involved, one or more. I couldn't answer that, but the interesting thing here, and if you notice in the photograph on the right, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see where my index finger is there toward the bottom of the frame. You notice that from that point up, there's a branch to the left that's healthy, and one that goes straight up that's wilted and dying. So that's an indication that you have some kind of a canker, an infection in the stem right there at that point, where some place between where you have the green and where you have the browning foliage. If you were to cut into that, you might see something like this. See that nice sharp transition zone if you're scraping the bark away, and that's the part that we want to get as a sample if you happen to be sampling for sending to the clinic for diagnostics. That transition zone is very important. With this disease, you can get the kind of pie-shaped or pie slice-shaped discoloration in a cross-section of the stem as the fungus goes into the wood. So those would be two things to look for when you suspect, well, three things. First of all, individual branches dying, whereas other branches are looking good, and the sharp transition zone and the presence of the discoloration in the wood like this. No particular treatment other than to prune these out. Go several inches into clean wood to make sure you got ahead of the fungus. If it's already gotten down to the crown, to the base of the plant, then it's pretty much game over, and you just have to remove it as soon as it isn't serving your purposes anymore, but there would be no remedy there. And of course, make sure you clean and frequently disinfest your pruning tools when you're doing these operations so that you don't inadvertently spread it to other places. On a less serious note, here is a disease called Exobasidium leaf gall. Now this photograph is from May of 2014. It's hard to believe that long ago. Now this is from my sister-in-law's place in Garner, and you'll see the big swellings on the leaves. Probably about this time. Well, this time it was May in that particular case, so you will be looking for these soon. Considered a bolo, and it's the leaf gall caused by the fungus Exobasidium vaccinii. And what happened in this case, it's a cosmetic basically problem. It's not going to affect the overall health of the shrub. But what she did was she dug up all the azaleas that she had along the foundation of the house and moved them just a short distance away around the base of a tree, and hasn't had a problem since. So it's possible, I suppose, that the increased airflow there where they are now meant that this didn't have enough moisture to be able to reproduce. So, but whatever it was, she has had success now with her azaleas since moving them. This is different from the Exobasidium that gets on camellia, so no need to worry about cross-contamination there. In this particular case, the galls were hollow, which is kind of cute, a little beetle there hiding out in the hollow of it. And if you're not going to actually dig up and move your shrubs, then the treatment is simply to cut these off before they turn white with the sporulation, and then continue the cycle. They can only infect the newly developing tissue, buds and leaves. So they hang out on or in the buds until next spring, the fungus does. In rare cases where you've got a lot of damage and you really want to spray, you could do something like maybe a copper spray, but at bud break. So this time of year, it's really too late. Just keep them pruned out. I see there was a question here. I read in Stammett's book that some types of mycorrhizal fungi produce nematicides. Has this fungi been used to help prevent this problem? I have not heard that. There are some fungi, not mycorrhizal fungi, but others that will trap nematodes, but not enough to really do sufficient biocontrol as far as I know. Of course, you'd have to go and look and see what kind of fungi are mycorrhizal with ericaceous plants, with azaleas and others, but I don't have enough information about that to answer it. I suspect that there's not been too much work done on that. We're a little bit behind the entomologists, I hate to admit it, in terms of how aggressively we go about trying to do biological control. Well, let me just conclude my part of the spiel here by mentioning a reference that may be of interest. The IPM, the second IPM shrub book, chapter 4 is about rhododendron and azalea. And so you'll see a lot of information there about these diseases and more, about the pests that Matt's going to talk about and more. And there's also a nice list of fungicides there. Many of those, since this book is geared toward nurseries, many of those are going to be only for commercial use, but some of them may be applicable to homeowners. And going back to last month's presentation, someone asked what fungicides are toxic to bees. This has notes on the groups of fungicides that have that problem. The only one I mentioned last time, out of my ignorance, was neem oil, which obviously is going to kill insects, but that has a little bit more information about the status as far as honeybees. And of course, the label is another thing that you want to look at. But I'll quickly cut and paste the information into the chat here of how you can link to that particular book. All right, so since I'm driving, Matt, are you ready? I'll go ahead and advance to your section.
Great. Okay, well, the azaleas do get a number of pests, and I'm going to try and go quickly through these so we can get to Charlotte's part, I think, and then we'll do some bolos. Okay, so the first one and the most major pest of azaleas, I would say, is azalea lace bugs, Stephanitis pyrioides. So these are true bugs, so they cause sucking damage. They don't chew the leaves. And these basically reside on the undersides of leaves. And they emerge from eggs that are laid in the midrib. You can see there right next to it that those are probably fecal spots covering eggs that are laid in the midrib of the leaves. And they hatch in the spring. You'll get nymphs and then adults, of course. And there are 2 or more generations in North Carolina. And basically, some products are available, and the spring application, the spring generation is probably the most damaging when the leaves are coming out and fresh. Their sucking action causes damage. That Mike, if you want to head to the next slide. The signs of azalea lace bugs are basically the tops of the leaves become chlorotic. The green is sucked right out of them, and you get this mottling chlorotic look and really just bad looking azaleas. And if you flip over the leaves on the underside, you'll often find shed skins and fecal spots. And so those fecal spots are a really common and very good sign for identifying that you have lace bugs, because not many of the other sucking arthropods, none of the other sucking arthropods will cause those fecal spots. Okay, so that's a very common one. Another one is the azalea prominent caterpillar, Datana major. These will feed on several ericaceous plants, so it will feed on blueberries and rhododendron and a few others, other rhododendron other than azalea. They started as small skeletonizers living in groups. You can see in the photo at the bottom. As they become larger, they become very distinct. You can see these caterpillars are over 1 inch long, almost 2 inches long when they're mature. They're this really crazy looking red head with red legs with these yellow spots all over. Very distinct caterpillar. And there are a couple other close relatives that are striped that will feed also on ericaceous hosts, including Azalea. But this is the most common one. Larger caterpillars are difficult to control. So if you have issues with these, it's good to scout the plants early on. I would say late May, June or so, you'll start to see these. And when they're younger, they're a little bit easier to deal with. You can even just prune out the section where the young caterpillars are, or use some kind of chemicals. But once they're larger, they're basically very difficult to control. Okay. Mike? Okay, another one is the Azalea leaf miner. This is a very small moth, Caloptilla azaleella. They emerge in the spring, about the time of the first spring flowering. After the mating, they lay eggs near their midrib, and the young larvae exits into the tissue. And you can see that caterpillar, the tissue is opened up there to see you can see the frass and the feeding that they've done. The older larvae then leave the mine and tie the tip of the leaf. They look very different than the young larvae. There are multiple generations in North Carolina, and the concealed larvae may not respond to contact chemicals, but again, these are fairly minor pests. Mike, you can move on to the next slide. They don't cause a lot of issues, but you can see up at the top left, that's that little shiny thing is the eggshell, and underneath is the mine. You can see a bigger mine, blotch mine on the bottom left. And then you can see in the middle bottom, the caterpillar that has come out and started to tie silk to the tip. And what it does is then curls the tip around, and it'll feed inside there, skeletonizing the tip. And you'll get these little brown spots, as you see on the right, on some of the foliage. Again, it's just many of these pests are just aesthetically damaging. Lace bugs are probably the most serious, but these you can leave if you can tolerate a little brown spots on your plants. But if not, some of these areas can be pruned out, and there are some products that can be used. Okay, next one. So this one is a fairly rare one. I don't know, I've never seen one of these, but the Azalea stem borer, Oberea myops, is a longhorn beetle. What they do is they actually, like other longhorn beetles, they prefer dead material to live in, or dead or dying material to live in as larvae. So what they do is they actually girdle the stem, certain stems, below a point where they're going to lay the eggs. And once the adults lay the eggs, and this is going to be around May or June, the larvae hatch and bore in the pith, and this may cause death of individual branches of your azaleas. Now, Mike did mention some canker diseases that might cause this too, so you'll just have to kind of, if you find a dead branch on an azalea, you just follow it down to the point where you see the green still, and what Mike showed you about cutting under the bark. If you see the damage, like this little chewing damage around there, you can always prune off that stem and split it open to look for these larvae. Again, very uncommon. I've never really come across it, maybe once before, but it was never confirmed for me. But okay, Mike, the next one. A common sucking insect, it can be common in certain situations, but I don't get a lot of samples of it, is a scale insect called the azalea bark or felt scale, Acanthococcus azaleae. So these lay eggs in that felted sac around the body around April. You can see that felt sac on the one on the left, and on the right is one that doesn't have the sac. The mature females basically lay their eggs under that felted sac, and then start to shrivel up and die. And then the young crawlers will emerge and crawl onto other parts of the plant. They can produce large quantities of honeydew, which can lead to sooty mold, and high numbers can stress plants and cause dieback. Look for these little whitish tufted scales on azaleas if you suspect that you have an issue of them. And then next one is, and then you can basically find a variety of other sucking insects, including some different armored scales. Here on the left, one of the armored scale tests or coverings has been taken off of one of them, but you can see all those little golden dots show another scale insect. So these actually inserted themselves under the bark, and sometimes they're a little cryptic, but these are scale insects, armored scales. This one specifically is Pseudoanidia peoniae, which is the peony scale. Not specific to peony, obviously. And of course, there are also a bunch of aphids that feed on azaleas, not usually a major issue at all. They'll suck the plant juices, but not really cause any visible damage. But these aphids, Vesiculaphus charisis, can be common on azaleas, and they're kind of a little more rough looking and flattened than many of the aphids people are familiar with. But, azaleas do have a number of insect pests, but I'd say really the most common one we see are lace bugs. They are extremely common, very common on azaleas. Just look for that stippling pattern on the top of the leaf surfaces and flip it over and look for the bugs or the fecal matter. So, yep. And thank you for linking our fact sheet for azalea lace bugs for control. So that's all I have, I think, for insects of azaleas or arthropod pests.
All right, thank you. To get myself muted, unmuted, I mean. Okay, were there any other questions, or are we ready to jump over to our plant these instead? Looks like we got everything covered. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, so you should see I've got our Plant These Instead feature for this month is going to talk about alternatives to azaleas, which I know can be a very controversial topic in the South, where azaleas are the plant for spring gardens. So they're extremely popular, and for good reason. You know, the small to medium-sized shrubs, the largest types, may get about 6 feet tall, 8 feet wide. The old southern indicas, those types, but then they range down to the little gumpos and satsuki types, which may only not even be quite a foot tall and, maybe a couple of feet wide. So a lot of range and size and flower color, just beautiful, beautiful colors and blooms in the spring that are extremely showy because they really stand out and cover the plant. These are plants for part shade. That's where they're going to be happiest. And they want that gardener's dream of a moist but well-drained soil. So we're typically talking about soil that has a lot of organic matter in it, relatively rich, holds moisture, but also drains well, a rare thing in most of our yards. But one other thing that makes them really, really popular is the evergreen foliage. So we don't have a lot of plants out there that have evergreen foliage and also have really showy flowers. So that really gives them a boost in popularity. But one of the challenges, many of the cultivars are at least somewhat susceptible to Phytophthora root rot, which we heard Mike talk about. And that's not something you can get rid of in the landscape. It's something you have to manage, and manage with proper plant selection is really important. So Mike mentioned the fact sheet, and this image was there, and it's been pulled from that fact sheet, the suggested plant species for sites with a history of Phytophthora root or crown rot, and it includes some good cultural practices, because we know even plants, when we talk about them being resistant, that does not mean they're immune. So it's less of a risk for them, but it's not impossible for something that we are talking as being resistant or tolerant to Phytophthora to succumb. So you also want to do things like improve drainage, like Mike mentioned, avoid overwatering and over-fertilizing. So what we're going to look at are some plants that have Phytophthora resistance or Phytophthora tolerance. So if you have sites where you know this has been an issue, you've lost plants to it, these are some things that are more likely to do well in those conditions. So we're going to look at a few flowering evergreen shrubs, which again, these are the rare plants. So we're really looking for a trifecta here of something that is evergreen, has showy flowers, and Phytophthora resistant. So first up, we have Indian hawthorn. So a spring bloomer blooms similar time to azaleas, maybe just a touch later. And of course, wanting to point out there's no perfect plant out there. With Indian hawthorn, you must be really careful with your cultivar selection, because it is susceptible to a leaf spot disease, into the sporium leaf spot, which can be very severe. But some of the newer cultivars especially have shown some good resistance. Snowcap, Indian Princess, and Southern Moon got some of the highest highly resistant ratings. That IPM shrub book that Mike referenced already is a great reference to learn more about pests and diseases of popular shrubs, and they have a chapter on Indian hawthorn that has the most extensive listings I was able to find about Indian hawthorn and resistance to Entomosporium. So I want to thank Mike for recommending that to me, and also for his input on these plant selections, his consultation on these Phytophthora resistant plants. The other caveat that you must know about with Indian hawthorn is deer love them. They absolutely love them. So if you have a lot of deer pressure, this is probably not going to work out very well for you. If you don't have a lot of deer, then it could be a good plant. For sun, depart shade, prefer well-drained soil. In the summer, we have Azaleas. Azaleas recently changed its name to Linnea. So Oberea used to be Oberea grandiflora, now Linnea grandiflora. And so the individual flowers aren't huge, and this is a smaller shrub that's just starting to bloom. But once they can really get covered in blooms and be pretty showy, especially closer up. The deer don't like them, so that's a bonus, but pollinators do. So you'll see butterflies and bees and other insects visiting the flowers. And there's a whole lot of cultivars because it is a really tough and adaptable shrub. It's also extremely easy to propagate. And they range in height, the many cultivars that are out there. You know, there's smaller ones that get to be about 3 feet to just the straight grandiflora, which is around 8 feet. A personal favorite of mine is named Rose Creek, and it's about 3 to 4 foot. But you'll see with some of the varieties, they're variegated. There's some gold-leafed ones. So there's a lot of really colorful foliage on some of these plants in addition to the summer blooms. And then in the fall, we have the Sasanqua camellias. So this is a kind of funny that the common name for this plant, typically people talk about them as Sasanquas or Sasanqua camellias, which is just a reverse of the scientific name, Camellia sasanqua. So these are our fall blooming camellias. So these are different from those winter and early spring bloomers, Camellia japonica, which are susceptible to Phytophthora, whereas the Camellia sasanqua are more tolerant or resistant. So there's a lot of cultivars here as well. This is a really popular plant, pink, white, red, flowers, many shades of pink actually. And a lot of them are fairly large, get to be fairly large shrubs, but we do have quite a few more compact ones available. This one in this picture is named Shishigashira, and it's an old favorite, old standard one for a smaller growing one. Bonanza, Chansonette, Mananoyuki are also a little smaller. And then there's a newer series, and again, this is one Mike introduced me to, called October Magic. And that series was bred for more compactness, and particularly the cultivars October Magic Orchid, Ruby, and Pink Perplexion are more compact. So keep an eye out for those as well if you're looking for something kind of more similar in size to an azalea for a fall blooming camellia. A few other things, if you really just need evergreen foliage, there's dwarf yaupon, which is just about the toughest little meatball shrub you can ever grow. In parking lots, you could always pick out the dwarf yaupons because they're the ones that are really healthy, and then everything else is usually dying. So this is our native, a selection of the native type of holly, Ilex vomitoria, which is native in the coastal plain. And there are several dwarf selections, again, Nana, Bordeaux, and Schillings. The one in the picture here is named Taylor's Rudolph, and it's a little bit unique because it is a female cultivar. With all of our hollies, we have separate male and female plants. All of our other dwarf yaupons are male, so they don't form any berries, but this Taylor's Rudolph is a female, so it gets some berries on it. I've seen the plant, and you can see in the picture here, you can see the berries, but usually because the plant is so dense, the berries aren't overwhelming because they're just kind of in all this dense foliage. But it's kind of just interesting. And then the Chinese hollies. So some of the, I think it dropped where I was mentioning the Chinese hollies, which are another super, super tough evergreen, and definitely, if you're looking for Phytophthora resistance, make sure you're looking at one of the Chinese hollies, the Ilex cornuta, because some of the other holly species are susceptible to Phytophthora. And again, there's a lot of cultivars out there, lots of different heights, but if you're looking for something a little more compact, Carissa is a real standard in the landscape industry. That gets to be about 3 to 4, about 4 to 5. And it's a male, so it doesn't have any berries, but some of the other larger Chinese hollies are female and they will have red berries. If you're looking for a native, we don't have, well, we have the yaupon, but we don't really have native shrubs that have also that are evergreen and have showy flowers. But, you know, if you're okay with something that's deciduous, a couple of options that are reported to have some Phytophthora resistance are the Virginia sweet spire, which is Itea virginica, a native shrub that usually blooms around Mother's Day and slightly fragrant. And the one drawback here is this is another one that deer really like. But in addition to the flowers, it does have beautiful fall color, these kind of burgundy tones. Then sweet pepper bush, which is Clethra alnifolia. This one is a summer bloomer and is very fragrant and has quite a drifting fragrance. And the deer aren't so fond of it, but the pollinators are. So you get lots of neat things visiting the flowers and you can have that fragrance. And this one also has good fall color, kind of usually a real clear yellow. So these are both shrubs for sun to part shade. If they're in more sun, it's more important they have a little more moisture. But both great things to add to the landscape that would grow in conditions similar to what azaleas would like. And a few other things and some references. Of course, these slides will be posted or are already posted. You can see them in our archive, and I'll put a link to that in just a minute. But some other things like roses, it's get every problem known to plant pathology except Phytophthora. So roses are actually resistant to Phytophthora, but they have a lot of other issues. So if you're looking at roses, just be careful with your selection and research varieties that have known resistance to some of their common problems. The spireas, there are many species, including the white flower types, which usually are the spring bloomers. There's a couple of species. Then the summer bloomers are usually either Spirea japonica or a hybrid called Spirea bamalda. They usually have pink flowers. And one thing to be aware about them is they've been reported invasive, especially in the western part of North Carolina. Mike mentioned the IPM shrub book chapter on rhododendron, which does have a thorough list of azalea cultivars and their known resistance rating. So if you're really eager to grow an azalea in an area that has Phytophthora, please check out that reference. And then I've just listed some more, which you can refer to. And of course, you can always go to the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox and explore all kinds of plant options for Southeast landscapes. Just for example, if you go to the Find a Plant and say you were looking for, under the whole plant traits, you're looking for shrubs, there's over 1,200. If you narrow it down and say, I want a broadleaf evergreen, you've got 352 listed. There's 635 deciduous plants. And you can do all kinds of other filtering with your searches to get things that are specific for your region, your growing conditions, to attract wildlife, to be resistant to specific challenges. You can even look for natives and lots more. So I encourage you to explore the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Matt and Mike for our bolos. And I will get the link to the Plant These Instead archive in the chat. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. And let me just mention real quickly, one other plant that we have on our list of suggestions for Phytophthora. It is not evergreen. It is not compact, particularly, although I've seen some that appear to be, but and it's a plant that's probably my favorite shrub, is the winterberry, the Ilex verticillata. Yeah. So that's another one to think about as a possibility, depending on your needs and circumstances. So
that's a good one, and it's another one that's native, and there are some more compact, but a lot of them are quite big. And I did see the question about Alstroemeria. Somebody asked about what about Alstroemeria, and so I would actually, for herbaceous, if you're thinking about herbaceous plants, I would refer you back to last month's Plants, Pests, and Pathogens when Inga Meadows was with us talking about Phytophthora and the results of some trials on annual and perennial herbaceous plants and their resistance. And that was one of the references I had linked that you can see on the archive slides.
Mike, do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
Why don't you go first?
Sure.
Only right.
All right, let's do some critter bolos. All right, so the first thing, cicadas. We've been talking about this a lot, I'm sure, so I'm just going to mention it. Of course, May right now and up the East Coast, some people have been finding the nymphs under rocks and logs just about near the surface of the soil. They're rearing to go, but we'll only be seeing brood X or brood 10 of the periodical cicadas, these black with the red eyes and orange wings, out in the very far western edge of the state. So everybody else will miss them this year, but just be on the lookout for these cicadas. I'm sure you won't have to look or listen hard to find them when they're in the area. Bagworms, we're going to start to see them hatching soon. When they're tiny and they're hard to find sometimes, but you can see how small this one is. It still has a bag, but it is only the size of the needle on this. I think this is, Mike's going to have to tell me all the time. I always mess this up. It's either an arborvitae or a leyland, probably an arborvitae. So look out if you have plants that get attacked by them every year. It might be good to bang these on some sheets, look for the larvae, or just look for these little tiny larvae crawling around. And that's the best time to treat, as when they get bigger, they're going to be much more difficult to treat. May beetles, so these chestnut brown nut looking beetles, fairly large, up to about an inch or so. Beetles are a type of scarab beetle that emerge at this time of year. They often come to lights. They're harmless. Their larvae are fairly harmless, basically. Rarely do they do damage in turf or other plants. So they're more of just a nuisance, sometimes showing up at lights in very high numbers, but otherwise they're just a scarab beetle that's out in the environment. Several types of bugs are developing, hatching from their eggs and developing nymphs, including wheel bugs, these predatory assassin bugs that are orange with a black front, or have an orange abdomen with black front and a yellow tip to the antennae, emerging from these egg clusters. But you may also see the similar squash bug nymphs emerging as well. Been seeing a lot of this year. This is a big year for cottony scales and cottony camellia scales specifically. These are on a lot of different plants right now. You're going to start to notice the females because of these long white ovisacs, these white sacs where they lay the eggs inside. This is on taxus, or a type of yew, which is a very common host for the cottony camellia scale. But of course, based on the name, they're also found on camellias as well as hollies. I've seen them on poison ivy and all different plants. They have many, many hosts. So be on the lookout for these. Now, I will say that Jim Baker, who gives the suggestions, gives the recommendations for these to homeowners, suggests not spraying or doing anything yet, because there are specific ladybugs that like to eat the eggs of these scales right out of the sac. And so if you spray, you may kill those. He suggests waiting till June when the ladybugs are gone, the eggs have hatched, and you've got crawlers that are susceptible. So even though you're seeing them now, you can just be a little patient and treat a little later. And we can send you some information if you want, but these are very common right now. Galls. So lots of galls are starting to develop as the leaves were small and developing. These insects affected the leaves and began to have the leaf tissue grow around them. So you may start to see the witch hazel aphid galls or these phylloxera galls on hickories and pecans. They typically don't do major damage to the plant. They just look strange. And you can see this foundrous phylloxeran inside this gall on a hickory. And of course, now that it's warmed up, people are outside, they're a food source for you, all are food source for ticks and mosquitoes. So be careful out there, wear DEET, treat clothing with permethrin for the ticks and things like that. If you have areas that are heavily infested, try to reduce the numbers of containers of water around neighborhoods for mosquito control. But yep, unfortunately, we're that time of year again. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
All right, thank you, Matt.
There was in the chat, there was a comment about cicadas being showing up every year in Virginia Beach.
Yes, so just to be clear, we do every year, there are cicadas everywhere. We have the annual cicadas later in the year. So they don't emerge usually until about late June or so. You know, they're more of a mid to late summer species. There's a group of different species. They're typically the larger green or black ones with white. Those are our annual or dog day cicadas that do show up every year. These periodical cicadas, though, are earlier in the year. They're going to be May to June. They're a little bit smaller, black with the orange and red highlights, and those are the ones that are 13 or 17-year cicadas. And so, they're kind of a much more rare event, that type. So yes.
Okay, Matt, I'm looking at that question in the chat, and it looks like they're asking about cicada wasps. But if Pam wants to maybe clarify what her question was.
Yeah, that'd be great. So is that about cicada wasps? Cicada killers, I'm assuming? And
looks like she's typing there.
okay. And Pam, if you just want to mute yourself, you're welcome to, and just ask the question. That's no problem.
It looks like it was just a statement.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, if you have any other questions, yeah, please ask. And Mike, if you, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
All right, let me share screen here. So talk a little about some of the diseases that we're seeing currently and to be on the lookout for as well. Let me just remind folks that we don't go into a lot of detail about these. And in this case, I'm not going to have a lot of examples to show, but also to remind folks that on our website, we've got a BOLO section where you can go in and month by month see extensive lists of some of the, especially diseases, to be on the lookout for in home gardens. One of the first ones, excuse me, that I want to talk about, though, is one that you want to think that we've left behind us in the past, but I think we'll be continuing to see the damage. Got an email just a couple of weeks ago, a week ago. Hello, this is name redacted. I live in Mecklenburg County and was hoping this is the correct address. My customer has some shrubs that were pruned extremely low last year by the previous owner, and the shoots came off to turn black recently. So as you can probably imagine, what we're looking at here is freeze injury. So that was from Mecklenburg County, and the low temperature at Charlotte Douglas International Airport went down to 28 degrees on April 3rd. So not too surprising that they had this kind of result. Here at RDU, we got down to 28 degrees that same morning, but only reached 31. So it was a record, but it was 3 degrees different. And those 3 degrees or some other factor made a world of difference. So we didn't really see around our area nearly the damage that we saw from the earlier frost, even though there was a lot more tender foliage out there for to be potentially harmed. So I saw damage on holly, on Indian hawthorn, a little bit on our hydrangeas at home. So we will probably continuing to see the effects of this as we get into the late spring now. But hopefully we're out of the woods for hard freezes until the fall. We got this photograph of a situation in Richmond County where there was this very unpleasant sort of slime or ooze coming out of the trunk of a muscadine grape. Excuse me. And Bill Klein, who's our, among other things, muscadine and blueberry expert, gave the answer to this one. What it is, it's sap that's leaking from the injured trunk, let me just read textually what he wrote. The image shows sap leaking from an injured muscadine trunk with microbial growth in the sap flow, producing a milky ooze. This is a common symptom in spring following winter injury, so freezing, or physical damage to the vine. Muscadine trunks that are split by freezing or other injury develop dark, wet spots where sap leaks from the injured area, and then that sap is colonized by yeast and bacteria and will often develop a highly visible whitish or orange streak of slime down the trunk. Now here's the money part. Damaged vines may survive, but often will have to be cut back to remove the damaged area. So if it's really low like this on the trunk, then you're talking about a pretty severe prune that may have to be done. The next photo here is, excuse me, a case that we had several years ago now, showing the more orange color that you can see, and also showing where the sap had flowed out of a pruning wound. So there you wouldn't expect too much problem, but on the trunk there, that's when you have to be a little bit concerned because there was some kind of a either physical or cold injury that caused a crack there. So they may decline later. But the orange itself is not the pathogen. It's just organisms, microorganisms that have colonized that oozing sap. A situation that we've seen on a couple of the samples so far this year, and I guess one of the themes here is going to be some somewhat surprises. When you talk about rust showing up in the spring on blackberry, you're often worried about orange rust. And I think we have talked about this. I think it was the year that we did the diagnostic series that we talked about orange rust on blackberry. They start out waxier looking, the pustules do on the underside, a little bit different pattern. And under the microscope, you can confirm that this was not actually orange rust, which is good because that one is systemic and you're talking about the removal of the plant. Whereas with the cane and leaf rust that I would have thought would show up a little bit later, but on old leaves that have overwintered, why that makes sense. But that's what we had here on this case, which was actually from the Johnson County Cooperative Extension Office. And we had another case from a grower where cane and leaf rust was present. This comes from the end of last month, and it was an image-only sample. So I'm not going to be 100% sure, but I'm fairly confident that what we're looking at in this grower's irises, very unsightly leaf spot caused by the fungus Heterosporium, or that's the name you probably have heard of it under. It's now classified as a cladosporium on iris. So a fungal leaf spot, and again, the importance of sanitation in this one, of making sure you remove all the dead leaves at the end of the year. Some other things may be necessary as well. A quick look at rose. Now we talked about roses being great as far as not getting Phytophthora, but as Charlotte mentioned, they're a magnet for just about every other kind of problem, especially this one. I was briefly at Fred Fletcher Park in Raleigh a couple of weekends ago and saw this coming out. So as you might imagine, what we're looking at here is probable rosette disease caused by a mite-transmitted virus. This is a big headache for both landscapes and for commercial producers, rose producers. You'll recognize a lot of symptoms at kind of two different times of year, and it seems, at least some have reported, kind of a spring window and then a fall window. And I would say, I heard that in context of Texas, but I think it probably applies here too. And one of the flags here, if you'll forgive the pun, the red flag that we're looking at is the extra elongation of those new shoots and also the retention of that juvenile red color. So instead of fading to the green that they should be, they stay red. So that is a big, again, red flag that you have rosette disease here. Now let's just quickly go through some of the symptoms because they can be confusing. Excuse me. All of these are potential symptoms of rose rosette, although you're not necessarily going to see all of them. So the red coloration of the new shoots and the excess elongation of those new shoots are early indications of trouble. The the red coloration again would fade in a healthy rose to a green color, the normal green color. So just the fact that new growth is coming out red isn't necessarily a problem. Shoot proliferation or witch's broom, that would probably be on a plant that's been infected for a while now. And you have to be a little bit careful because there are herbicides that will cause a witch's broom effect also. So it's not necessarily rose rosette if you have that. These last two, though, are unique to rose rosette disease. So the young stems, if you see stems coming off of a cane that are actually wider at the base than the cane from which they grew, then that is a good indication of rose rosette. And hyperthorniness, even though it's not always present, but that is only going to be a symptom of rose rosette disease, where you've got, I don't know, 10, 20 times the density of thorns that a normal plant would have. While we're on the subject of rose and on the theme of things that were a little bit surprising, this rose bush from our yard, and I just assumed that it was black spot coming out there, but a closer look at the spots, they didn't look quite right. Now with this disease, you can get leaf spots, you can get yellowing, you can get leaf drop. I used to think of this as more of a hot and humid weather kind of a disease, but there it is in April. And it turns out that this is, if you want to call it Cercospora leaf spot, using the old name, but the actual fungus is now called Passiflora rosicula. And it is one of our fairly common diseases of foliar diseases of rose. If you want to try and distinguish it from black spot, you can take your hand lens out, and with the Cercospora, you'll notice that the margin is fairly even, whereas it's almost feathery, very irregular in the case of black spot. And also you get with the Cercospora leaf spot, you can get that tan center and the little tufts where the spores are being produced in the middle, whereas the spore producing structures are more blister-like in the case of black spot. But the main thing is the coloration being more brown and the margin being more even. That's your tip-off that you've got Cercospora, or Passiflora technically, and not black spot. So keep those dead leaves cleaned up, and there are a number of fungicides that are available and effective for Cercospora leaf spot, but they have to be used in a protective way to keep the new foliage from becoming infected. Just wanted to toss this picture out. I had for a long time noticed that some of our Indian hawthorns on campus near our building were very different. There was one area where there's a lot of Entomosporium leaf spot, and there's another area just a few yards away where there's not any. And I had thought, well, maybe it's the microclimate there, that the one corner is more exposed and has more airflow. But when I saw the flowers this year, I realized that we're looking at two different cultivars, and there's a dramatic difference. So Charlotte already mentioned some of the ones. If you're looking for Indian hawthorn, look for ones that are going to be, resistant to Entomosporium. Just really quickly here, the vegetable gardens. So there's going to be millions and millions of tomato and pepper transplants going out into gardens across our country in the next few weeks. Make sure that you're looking very carefully at those transplants if you're buying them, or if you produce them yourself even, to make sure that you're planting healthy material out. So some diseases like bacterial leaf spot there on pepper in the lower center photograph, or can happen on tomato as well. So these can be on transplants. Early blight would be another one to watch out for in that context. And not one you'd see on transplants, but that can move in from weeds as early as May, is tomato spotted wilt virus. So you see that in the lower left with the kind of finer dark spotting on the very young growth, whereas the bacterial leaf spot will be first on the older leaves. And of course, things that we ourselves are responsible for, either under or over fertilization and herbicide injury. People see weeds coming up and get out the sprayer, and if you're not careful, you can get damage like you see on the right there, classic glyphosate injury. A low dose may not kill the plant, but you'll see that bright yellow coloration at the base of the leaflets on the tomato. And you know that somehow that got a whiff of glyphosate. And again, for other bolos, you want to see the complete list and check out our website. And I will stop sharing and let Charlotte wrap it up. Unless there were any questions there. Let's see, different options. Oh, wow. While I was talking, a lot of the questions have been asked on chat. So let me look through these quickly here. Not sure what Pamela was talking about in the context. Missed the context there, but I think it hurt my roses too.
I think that was the frost when we're talking about the cold damage.
Oh, okay. Have you ever heard of spraying garlic while on rose print disease? No, I have not. I would not expect that to be really effective. It would wash off easily for one thing. Let's see. I've read different opinions spraying disease or spraying shears. Can you confirm? There should be differing opinions because it depends on what disease you're talking about. I would definitely want to be careful with some of the canker diseases. Like I mentioned with Phomopsis, with the Azalea, some of the rose, like common canker and rose. But you don't have to worry about rosette, for example, that you're not going to spread by pruning shear. So it depends on the disease. When in doubt, just sanitize frequently, make sure you have enough exposure time, clean them. Rubbing alcohol is one of the things you can use. So I would use a combination of rubbing alcohol and make sure they physically appear clean. You can spray Listerine if gnats are a bother. Okay, I'll let Matt talk about that one in a second if he wants to mention it. Sounds like Listerine would probably be phytotoxic if you're talking about plants. Are either of these diseases leaf spots found on muscadine? No, those rose diseases are not found on muscadine, but black rot, which you see as a berry, a fruit disease on bunch grapes, does cause a leaf spot on muscadine, and I believe there are some others as well. And then Charlotte mentioned the California rose disease fact sheet. 4 messages beyond that. Let's see. What should we be doing about camellia galls? All right, again, at this point, what you want to do is trim those. I assume you're talking about Exobasidium galls, the big thick ones that started out kind of pale green and then turned white, and then probably secondary fungi moved in and turned black. Remove them if they've already turned white, and especially if they've already turned black, then they've already done their thing. So you've got the infections potentially for next year, but remove those as soon as you see them. I'll let Charlotte ask about the archives. And oh, I see Caroline has. Thrips, Matt, that one's for you. And okay, clarification on the Listerine bit. I'll let Matt handle that. All right.
All right.
I see someone mentioned about figs. Yeah, figs are quite sensitive to frost. Some cultivars more than others. Do always look for possible, if you have a really hard freeze, there can be splitting in the stems of different plants. So sometimes in August we diagnose cold injury because the plant is stressed and the lower stem was damaged earlier in the year or late the last fall. I've said enough. Charlotte or Matt, all yours.
I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, Matt, I'll go ahead and just finish these last few announcements, then we can go back to those questions.
Sure.
Sound good? All right, so thank you. Just a few announcements to finish things off. If you like the watering cans in the NC State brand colors, they are available to download to use for the Extension Master Gardener program. So that'll be one of the links that goes in the follow-up email. Also, there was a message that went out last week. Just want to make sure everybody knows about this great new publication. There was a lot of exciting and exuberant responses to this. Homeowner's Guide to Managing Diseases Using Fungicides, Bactericides, and Alternative Products. So we don't have a lot of publications geared towards disease management just for homeowners. So this is a new one I recommend you check out. It has lots of great tables for different products and including those alternative products that are available to homeowners. I know National Volunteer Week was last week, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you to all our Master Gardener volunteers for what you do. Encourage you to go to our Facebook page and look at some of our posts from last week. And just a follow up to that, just check out our annual report as well. It just highlights the amazing things Master Gardener volunteers did throughout 2020. You know, even though we had offices closed and lots of volunteer service not possible, we still had, you know, 109,000 hours reported from Master Gardener volunteers. And we focused our annual report on the stories of resilience about how you've helped people across the state grow through the pandemic, learn about gardening, meeting community needs, and engaging youth in remote learning. So I hope everybody has had the opportunity to check that out and keep up the wonderful things you're all doing. We do have a couple of upcoming things to know about. We will have another one of our Inspire, Connect, Empower webinars. These are funded by the North Carolina Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Association. We're going to be talking about virtual hotlines we want people to share what you've done in your county, not just during the pandemic, but what you maybe will continue to do beyond the pandemic, because it has opened up new ways for us to respond to people's questions. So, you know, what are you doing in your county? Are you answering questions through Zoom? Have you got an email account set up that volunteers can monitor from home? Are you using Ask Extension? We want to hear from you. So you can email us at ncemgprogram@ncsu.edu. And we're looking for people who will share what's happening, what they've found works in their county. And we'll set the date, probably early part of June, based on the availability of our folks who are going to be sharing. Late June, June 29th. So one to add to your calendar, we'll have just a webinar about using images. So when can we use images for educational purposes that would fall under fair use? When do we need to know about citing images and looking for Creative Commons licenses and stuff like that? This should be a very interesting and valuable workshop or webinar led by Will Cross, who's the Director of Copyright and Digital Scholarship Center at NC State Libraries. That is already posted on our EMG Internet calendar if you'd like to go ahead and sign up. Then, of course, our International Master Gardener Conference being hosted by Virginia this year, this September. It is going to be virtual. They had to make that decision late last year, but registration is now open. I've heard recent numbers of over 600 people have already registered. The registration is $150, but our North Carolina Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Association has a partial scholarship program for members. If you're not a member, you can join online, but those applications are due May 1st. So go ahead and make a move on that, and their scholarships will cover, I believe, $75 of that registration fee. Also associated with the International Master Gardener Conference is the International Master Gardener Search for Excellence, which is accepting applications through May 1. So if you've got great projects, wonderful projects like some of those that were featured in the annual report, and you know, please go ahead and submit them. We want to see strong representation from North Carolina. We've had great projects be recipients of these International Master Gardener Awards before, but just know if you put an application in and you are either a first, second, or third place recipient, you'll be asked to do a really short video about your project to be used to share with others during the conference. Then last of all, we'd look forward to seeing you all back here next month, May 25th. Our feature speaker will be Shannon Curry from Hoffman Nursery, and she will be talking on grasses and sedges, the new workhorses of the garden. Between now and then, you can catch up with past recordings on our YouTube playlist, as well as our recording index where we have them all chronologically listed. So thank you all for being here. I know there were a few more questions to throw back to Matt, so I'll turn it back over to him. But hope you all enjoy the rest of this beautiful day and wonderful week.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. Okay, well, I'll just answer a couple of these. I saw something about, thank you for clarifying about the Listerine. I haven't heard of that. I imagine it may help repel gnats that bother you outside. Gnats that are bothering people outside, usually flying around their eyes or face, are typically flies in the family Chloropody, which are called fruit flies or eye gnats. They develop in grass and other areas. It may help, but it probably would burn your eyes, and I don't think it would last very long. It's probably the alcohol that's repelling them. Maybe some of the scents that are in there. DEET should work just as well, if not better and longer, to help repel them, because DEET is typically a general fly repellent. Mosquitoes are technically a fly. Yeah, they can be difficult and really annoying. So do what you can, but they shouldn't harm you. I also saw something about thrips on camellia. That's a new one for me. I don't typically see thrips issues on camellia, so I'd be curious to see what the whether you identified thrips and if this was on the flowers or the leaves. Bruce, if you want to clarify that a little bit. I'm curious what damage you were seeing, yeah, I typically don't see that thrips as problems on camellia. We most often see scale insects and a few other things on camellia. So on the bottoms of the leaves, yeah, I'd have to see what you were talking about. Again, thrips, it may be greenhouse thrips, can sometimes affect evergreen leaves like that. But it would be something that if you're not sure, or if you're wanting information about, it would be best to have the culprits identified for that. You can always send us photos or samples, and we'll take a look.
All right, looks like that's a wrap for our April Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. I'm going to stop the recording.